Welcome to Urban American Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The phone call Stephen Clark received in a small village in Ghana made his heart race. His neighbor, Margaret Collins, a 78-year-old woman who lived next door to his property in Asheville, North Carolina, could barely control her voice as she recounted the absurdity of what was happening. "Stephen, honey, you need to come back. That woman, she just invaded your land and is building something huge. I tried to stop it. I showed her the documents you left with me, but she has a team of lawyers, and she completely ignored me." Stephen felt sweat trickle down his forehead, and it wasn't just from the African heat. 4 months ago, he had left his 2-acre property on the outskirts of Asheville to take part in a humanitarian project, building schools in underprivileged communities in Ghana. As a retired teacher, he had always dreamed of making a difference in the world, and this project was his way of repaying all the blessings he had received in life. "Who's building it, Mrs. Collins?" he asked, trying to remain calm as he watched the children playing in the courtyard of the newly built school. "Patricia Evans, that famous chef from the cooking show. She showed up with her plans and blueprints, claiming she bought the land from a Robert Maxwell. But Stephen, you and I both know that this land has been in your family for 3 generations. The name Patricia Evans made Stephen shudder. He was well aware of the chef's reputation, not only for her elaborate dishes, but also for her authoritarian and manipulative behavior. Her appearances on local TV always generated controversy, especially when she publicly humiliated her subordinates or criticized other establishments. While trying to process the information, Stephen received the photos Margaret had taken by email. A 3-story building with a modern design and extensive glass panels was almost complete on her property. The restaurant, Le Petit Jardin, occupied a considerable area of his land, including the space where Stephen planned to build a community garden to teach sustainable agriculture to underprivileged children. "She connected everything to your utilities, Stephen," Margaret continued. "Water, electricity, sewage, everything is connected to your house. And what's worse, she's demanding that you pay rent for the use of the structure when you get back." The irony of the situation would be comical if it weren't so revolting. Stephen has dedicated his life to teaching and community service, and now, while helping to build schools in Africa, a local celebrity was literally stealing his land. Immediately, Stephen contacted his lawyer, Michael Bennett, who began gathering documentation and evidence. The deeds were clear. The land had belonged to the Clark family since 1952, when his grandfather bought it to establish one of the first organic farms in the region. "I have to go back," said Stephen to Lauren Martinez, the project coordinator in Ghana. "I'm sorry, but I have to defend what's mine." Lauren, an American of Mexican descent who has dedicated her life to humanitarian projects, understood the situation. "Go on, Stephen. You've done a lot here. The children will miss you, but some battles have to be fought." In the following weeks, while Stephen organized his early return, the situation in Asheville became even more complicated. Patricia Evans began operating the restaurant, attracting the local elite with her exclusive dishes and exorbitant prices. The local media covered the new establishment with enthusiasm, completely ignoring the issue of land ownership. Robert Maxwell, the alleged seller of the land, was a real estate speculator known for dubious practices. When confronted by Michael Bennett, he presented documents that had clearly been forged, with signatures that didn't match the official records. The Asheville community began to split. While some residents, especially the older ones who knew the Clark family, were outraged by the situation, others were delighted with the glamour that the new restaurant was bringing to the area. The local homeowners association, chaired by Victoria Winters, a close ally of Patricia's, went so far as to send a letter congratulating the chef on a venture that enhanced the neighborhood. When Stephen finally returned to Asheville after a 19-hour flight and an exhausting stopover in London, the sight of the illuminated restaurant on his property made his stomach turn. The establishment occupied the space where, for generations, his family had grown organic food and created memories. Patricia Evans was waiting for him at the entrance to the restaurant, impeccable in her chef's uniform, with a smile that mixed arrogance and false cordiality. "Welcome back, Mr. Clark. I hope you enjoyed your vacation in Africa. Now can we discuss the terms of your rental?" Stephen felt a mixture of anger and determination. He was not a man of conflict, having spent his life teaching young people about the importance of empathy and mutual respect. But now, he was facing a battle he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about his property. It was about justice, about respecting the rights of others, and about preventing people like Patricia Evans from continuing to abuse their power and influence. "There will be no discussion about rent, Ms. Evans," Stephen replied, keeping his composure. "This is my property, and you're here illegally. I suggest you start looking for a new location for your restaurant, because this conflict will be settled in the courts." Patricia's smile faltered for a moment, but soon returned, even more calculating. "Do you really want to get into this fight, Mr. Clark? I have the best lawyers on the East Coast and the resources to drag this out for years. How long do you think it will last?" The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed, but Stephen stood his ground. He knew he was starting an uphill battle, but he also knew he was on the right side. With the support of his community, the documented truth, and his unwavering determination, he was ready to face whatever it took to reclaim what was rightfully his. The morning after his return, Stephen met with his lawyer Michael Bennett at his office located in historic downtown Asheville. The building's Art Deco atmosphere contrasted with the modernity of the digital documents spread out on the mahogany desk. "The records are crystal clear, Stephen," Michael explained, adjusting his gold-framed glasses. "The land was bought by your grandfather in 1952, passed to your father in 1978, and you legally inherited it in 2005. There is no valid transaction with Robert Maxwell or Patricia Evans." Stephen looked at the aerial photos of his property before and after the restaurant was built. The contrast was shocking. Where once there was a green field destined for community projects, now stood an imposing structure of glass and steel. "What about the illegal utility connections?" asked Stephen, remembering the astronomical energy bill he had found when he arrived. Michael flipped through some documents. "That's even more serious. We have proof that they made the connections without authorization from the power and water company. It's a clear violation of the municipal code." While they were discussing legal strategies, Victoria Winters, president of the Homeowners Association, sent Stephen an intimidating email. The text suggested that his prolonged absence demonstrated neglect of property and that the construction of the restaurant had revitalized an abandoned area. "They're trying to create a narrative," explained Michael. "They want to make it look like you abandoned the property and that Patricia is doing the community a favor." The battle began to gain local media attention. The Asheville Gazette ran a biased story highlighting how Le Petit Jardin was attracting tourists and boosting the local economy. The article barely mentioned the ownership dispute, reducing it to a minor administrative issue. Patricia Evans took advantage of the exposure to launch a public relations campaign. She organized a charity event at the restaurant, inviting local celebrities and promising to donate part of the proceeds to educational projects, an irony not lost on Stephen, who had just returned from his mission in Africa. "She's trying to paint me as the villain," said Stephen, looking out his office window at the Blue Ridge Mountains in the background. "Like I'm the obstacle between the community and progress." The situation became even more tense when Margaret Collins, the neighbor who had warned Stephen, began receiving veiled threats. Anonymous letters suggested that she stop meddling in other people's affairs and think about your safety. "This is criminal intimidation," declared Michael, adding another page to the lawsuit he was putting together. "We're going to include that in the lawsuit." Stephen decided to fight back constructively. With the help of former students and community members, he organized a photo exhibition documenting the history of his property. The images showed 3 generations of the Clark family farming the land, community projects carried out there, and above all, the neighborhood children learning about sustainable agriculture. The exhibition, mounted in Asheville's public library, began to change public opinion. Longtime residents shared their own stories about how the Clark land had benefited the community over the decades. Patricia Evans, sensing the change in winds, tried a new tactic. Through her lawyers, she offered to buy the property for substantially above market value. "Think about it, Mr. Clark," the letter said. "You could use this money to fund dozens of educational projects in Africa." The offer was tempting, but Stephen knew that accepting would mean validating Patricia's illegal actions. Besides, the land represented more than money. It was his family's legacy and a valuable resource for the community. It's not for sale, Stephen replied through his lawyer. It never has been. The investigation into Robert Maxwell, the alleged seller of the land, began to reveal a pattern of real estate fraud in other states. Michael discovered that Maxwell had been indicted in Tennessee for similar schemes, using forged documents to sell properties that didn't belong to him. This strengthens our case, Michael explained. It shows that Patricia either didn't do her due diligence when buying the land, or was knowingly participating in the fraud. Meanwhile, the utility bills kept coming in at astronomical rates. The restaurant, with its industrial kitchens and air conditioning systems, consumed much more energy and water than a normal home. Patricia refused to make her own connections, insisting that the existing installations were perfectly adequate. The community began to mobilize. A group of residents, led by Margaret Collins, started a social media campaign with the hashtag Justice for Clark. Former students of Stevens organized peaceful protests in front of the restaurant, politely informing customers about the real situation of the property. Victoria Winters and the Homeowners Association tried to ban the protests, claiming that they harmed the harmony of the neighborhood. But the local police chief, knowing the Clark family's reputation well, guaranteed the demonstrators' right to protest peacefully. "We're gaining ground," Michael said during an update meeting. "Public opinion is changing, we have solid evidence of the fraud, and the authorities are starting to pay attention to the case." Stephen looked out at his office window, watching the clouds move over the mountains. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since his return, he felt that justice would prevail. Not just for him and his family, but for everyone who believed that the right to property goes hand in hand with responsibility towards the community. "We will continue," he said, determined. "It's not just about getting my land back. It's about showing that we can allow people like Patricia Evans and Robert Maxwell to destroy the fabric of our community with their greed." The discovery of Robert Maxwell's notebook changed everything. Michael Bennett couldn't contain his excitement as he presented the evidence to Stephen in his office. A former employee of Maxwell's, repentant of his involvement in the scam, had handed over the device full of compromising emails between Maxwell and Patricia Evans. "They planned this over a year ago," Stephen, Michael explained, turning the laptop around to show the messages. "Patricia identified your property long before you traveled to Ghana. She monitored your movements, waiting for the perfect moment to act." The messages revealed a meticulously crafted plan. Patricia had thoroughly researched the Clark family history, found out about the humanitarian project in Africa, and calculated precisely how long it would take to build the restaurant during Stephen's absence. "But there's more," continued Michael, opening another file. "Victoria Winters, the president of the Homeowners Association, is also involved. She received a considerable donation for her neighborhood revitalization project, days before approving the fraudulent building permits." Stephen felt his stomach turn. The betrayal went beyond Patricia and Maxwell. It involved people who were supposed to protect the interests of the community. How many other properties have they stolen like this? The answer came through an investigation launched by the FBI. Robert Maxwell and his associates had carried out similar schemes in 3 different states, always targeting temporarily absent or vulnerable homeowners. The total value of the scams exceeded $15 million. Margaret Collins, still facing intimidation, decided to install security cameras on her property. The recordings captured 2 suspicious men prowling around her house in the early hours of the morning. When confronted with the images, Patricia Evans denied any involvement, but her expression betrayed her nervousness. "We need to protect Margaret," insisted Stephen. "She's our main witness about the illegal construction." The community responded by organizing a voluntary surveillance system. Former students of Stevens took it in turns to monitor Margaret's residence, while other residents installed additional cameras on their properties. Le Petit Jardin continued to operate, but its clientele began to dwindle. The revelations about the establishment's fraudulent origins drove away the more conscientious customers, especially after the local media finally began to cover the case in a more balanced way. Patricia Evans, feeling cornered, changed her tactics. During a live interview for a local cooking show, she wept copiously, claiming to be the victim of a conspiracy. "I bought this property legally," she sobbed. "Stephen Clark is trying to destroy me, because he's jealous of my success. The performance might have worked had it not been for Lauren Martinez, the project coordinator in Ghana. She had meticulously documented all of Stephen's work in Africa, including daily videos of the school constructions. Her evidence completely destroyed the narrative that Stephen had abandoned his property. "The courts need to see this," declared Michael, reviewing the recordings. "It clearly shows that you were doing vital humanitarian work, not taking a vacation, as Patricia claims." The FBI investigation began to tighten its grip. Robert Maxwell, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his fraud, began to consider a plea bargain. His lawyers began negotiations with federal prosecutors, offering details of everyone involved in the scheme. Victoria Winters, sensing that the ship was sinking, abruptly resigned as president of the Homeowners Association. Her letter of resignation, full of vague justifications about personal reasons, only increased suspicions about her involvement. On a particularly tense afternoon, Patricia Evans showed up unannounced at Stephen's house. Her usual arrogant demeanor had been replaced by a more conciliatory posture. "We can settle this like civilized adults," she proposed. "I'm willing to pay a fair rent and regularize all the utility connections." Stephen looked at the woman who had stolen his land and tried to destroy his reputation. "Mrs. Evans, your actions were not only illegal, they were morally repugnant. You stole not only from me, but from the entire community that benefited from that space." The celebrity chef momentarily lost her composure. "You don't understand. I invested millions in that restaurant. I can't just abandon it now. You should have thought of that before you built illegally on someone else's property," replied Stephen, maintaining the calm that characterized him as an educator. "Now please get out of my house." As Patricia left, visibly shaken, Stephen reflected on how his life had changed in recent months. The retired teacher, who had always avoided confrontation, now found himself at the center of a legal battle that could set important precedents about property rights. "You're doing the right thing," assured Marta Collins, who had brought an apple pie to share with Stephen that evening. "It's not just about her property. It's about stopping people like her from continuing to damage our community." Margaret's words echoed of greater truths. This battle had become something more than a dispute over a piece of land. It was a clash between different visions of community, one based on mutual respect and collective benefit, the other on greed and exploitation. As they savored the pie on the veranda, watching the sun set behind the imposing restaurant that now marred their property, Stephen knew that the real victory would not only be in reclaiming their land, but in preserving the values that his family had always defended. The bomb went off on a Wednesday morning when the FBI simultaneously raided Robert Maxwell's office, Le Petit Jardin, and Victoria Winters' home. The operation, the result of months of painstaking investigation, exposed a network of corruption that extended far beyond Stephen Clark's estate. "We found documents proving at least 12 similar cases in 3 different states," explained Special Agent Diana Rodriguez to Stephen and Michael Bennett during a meeting at the local FBI office in Asheville. The scheme always followed the same pattern: identify temporarily absent owners, falsify sales documents, and quickly build up commercial establishments. The evidence was devastating. Maxwell's notebook revealed substantial bank transfers from Patricia Evans to an account in the Cayman Islands, coinciding with the dates of the document forgeries. Victoria Winters had received commissions for facilitating irregular approvals in at least 5 other cases. "It's a sophisticated scheme," Rodriguez continued, spreading photographs out on the table. "They relied on the delay in the judicial system and the high cost of lawsuits to force legitimate owners to give up or accept disadvantageous settlements." Patricia Evans, confronted with the evidence in her own restaurant, had a public meltdown. The establishment security cameras captured the moment when she threw plates against the wall and shouted at federal agents, happy to be restrained and escorted from the premises. The local media, which had previously glamorized Le Petit Jardin, now rushed to cover the scandal. The Asheville Gazette, in a complete editorial turnaround, published an investigative series entitled Empire of Fraud: How a Celebrity Chef Built Her Success on Stolen Land. Margaret Collins, still recovering from the trauma of the threats, found the strength to testify. Her detailed testimony about the illegal construction and intimidation attempts provided the FBI with crucial pieces of the puzzle. They thought they could scare me, she told Stephen as they shared a coffee on their balcony. But my father always said, the truth is like a seed. It may take a while to sprout, but once it does, nothing can stop it from growing. The Asheville community began a process of self-criticism. How had such an elaborate fraud thrived for so long? The answer lay partly in the culture of deference to wealth and status that allowed Patricia Evans to operate with impunity. Laura Martinez, who had returned from Ghana to testify, brought a unique perspective. In many African communities where we work, the concept of ownership is intrinsically linked to social responsibility, she explained during a community assembly. What Patricia did wasn't just stealing land, it was stealing opportunities from an entire community. Robert Maxwell, facing decades in prison, finally broke. In a plea bargain, he exposed the entire scheme, including local politicians who had been bribed to ignore irregularities in building approvals. This goes far beyond Asheville, said Michael Bennett, reviewing the deposition transcripts. Maxwell deployed variations of this scheme in communities throughout the southeastern United States. Victoria Winters, after her house arrest, began receiving visits from former members of the Homeowners Association, demanding explanations. The investigation revealed that she had diverted more than $500,000 in association fees to personal accounts. Le Petit Jardin, once a symbol of gastronomic sophistication, now remained closed, its glass windows covered with FBI notices. The staff, many of whom were unaware of the establishment's fraudulent origins, were left without jobs. Stephen, with the support of the community, organized a job fair specifically for these workers. They are not to blame for Patricia's actions, he explained. They deserve a chance to start again. The investigation also revealed something surprising. Patricia Evans wasn't really a trained chef. Her culinary training consisted of a few basic workshops, and many of her exclusive recipes were actually plagiarized from lesser-known European chefs. Her whole life was a fraud, commented Michael, reviewing the documents. The restaurant was just the tip of the iceberg. While the case played out in the courts, Stephen began to plan the future of his property. The community's proposals ranged from turning the building into a community center to tearing it down completely and restoring the land for agriculture. Whatever the decision, said Stephen during a meeting with local residents, it will be taken together with the community. This land has always been more than private property. It's a resource that benefits everyone. Stephen Clark's story has become a case study in law schools, highlighting the importance of community vigilance and the dangers of unbridled greed. More importantly, it demonstrated how a united community can confront and defeat even the most powerful adversaries. As autumn arrived in the Blue Ridge Mountains, bringing with it an explosion of color, Stephen watched his property from the balcony, reflecting on how a simple land dispute had turned into a lesson about justice, community, and perseverance. Fall had just arrived in Asheville when federal judge Marcus Anderson banged his gavel, sealing the fate of Patricia Evans, Robert Maxwell, and Victoria Winters. The sentence was clear. Patricia received 12 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. Maxwell, who cooperated with the authorities, got 8 years, while Victoria Winters was sentenced to 5 years and obliged to repay all the money embezzled from the Homeowners Association. Justice serves not only to punish, declared Judge Anderson during sentencing, but to restore the community's faith in the legal system and protect those who dedicate their lives to the common good. Stephen watched the scene from the courtroom gallery, sitting between Margaret Collins and Lauren Martinez. Patricia's last words before she was taken away surprised everyone. Mr. Clark, she said, turning to face him, I've spent my entire life building a facade of success on lies. Watching your dignity during this process, I realized that I had forgotten what really matters. I am Soda. In the following weeks, the Asheville community began the healing process. A new board of directors was elected for the Homeowners Association, this time with strict rules of transparency and limited powers. Margaret Collins, despite her advanced age, agreed to serve as an honorary consultant. The issue of the Le Petit Jardin building generated intense debate. Some wanted to demolish it, erasing the symbol of Patricia's fraud. Others suggested turning it into something beneficial for the community. Stephen organized a series of assemblies to discuss the future of the structure. We can turn this monument to greed into something that benefits everyone, he proposed during one particularly emotional meeting. Just as we did in Africa, we can build something that educates and unites people. The solution came from an unexpected source. Derek Evans, Patricia's teenage son, turned up at one of the meetings. The 16-year-old, who lived with his father in Seattle, had a surprising proposal. "My mother destroyed many lives with her ambition," said Derek, his voice trembling slightly. "But she also taught me to cook, and it was the only real thing we shared. What if we turned this place into a cooking school for underprivileged young people?" The idea resonated with Stephen, who immediately saw the educational potential. With the help of Michael Bennett, he set up a nonprofit foundation to run the project. The Asheville Community Culinary Center began to take shape. Lauren Martinez, impressed by the transformation, decided to expand her humanitarian work to include Asheville. "The lessons we learned in Africa about community and cooperation are just as valid here," she explained, helping to develop a program that combined cooking with social awareness. Former Le Petit Jardin employees were invited to return as instructors. Many accepted, happy to be able to use their skills for a greater purpose. Sous chef Marcus Thompson, who had always dreamed of teaching, took on the role of educational coordinator. "We're transforming lives through food," said Marcus during the center's inauguration. "But unlike what we did before, now it's to benefit everyone, not just the privileged." The community garden that Stephen originally planned was integrated into the project. The students learned not only how to cook, but also how to understand the whole farm-to-table process. Margaret Collins, with her gardening experience, became a constant presence in the outdoor classes. The FBI, impressed by the positive transformation, used the case as an example in its real estate crime training program. Aja Rodriguez often cited how the response of the Asheville community had been instrumental in dismantling the scheme. "It's not just about arresting criminals," she explained in her lectures. "It's about strengthening communities so that such crimes don't find fertile ground to thrive." Victoria Winters, serving her sentence under house arrest, began a process of reflection. Through her lawyer, she offered to testify in similar cases in other states, helping to dismantle other real estate fraud networks. A year after his sentencing, Stephen received a letter from Patricia from the federal prison where she was being held. She had started teaching basic cooking classes to other inmates, finally finding a legitimate way to use her knowledge. "Maybe it's too late for me," she wrote, "but knowing that my son is turning my mistakes into something positive gives me hope. You have taught me that true success is not measured by money or fame, but by the positive impact we make on the lives of others." The Culinary Center quickly became a model of success. Young people who previously faced uncertain futures found purpose and opportunity through the program. Many graduates have started their own businesses or returned as mentors. On a quiet spring afternoon, as he watched a new class of students learning to grow herbs in the garden, Stephen reflected on how adversity can be turned into opportunity. "See those seedlings?" he said to Margaret, who was lovingly watering a bed of basil. "They're like our community. Even after hard times, with the right care, there's always a chance for a new beginning." The story of Stephen Clark and his battle against greed and corruption has become more than a court case. It has become a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of community, and the human capacity to turn tragedy into triumph. The building that once symbolized fraud and selfishness now echoed with the laughter of students and the scent of dreams being fulfilled. It was living proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying what is wrong, but from transforming it into something extraordinarily right.